The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't because anyone confessed. It was because my name was staring back at me from a piece of paper I had never signed. We were sitting around my mother-in-law Lorraine's dining table in Phoenix, the kind of polished wood table she loved to show off to guests. Erica was outside in the driveway, laughing loudly as she showed off her brand-new silver SUV to anyone who would look. The headlights flashed through the window like a warning I didn't yet understand. That was when a thick folder slid slightly out of Lorraine's purse and onto the edge of the table. A single page peeked out, just enough for me to see my full legal name printed in bold black letters. Olivia Bennett. Clear. Official. Wrong. Lorraine glanced at me, noticing the paper, then laughed softly. The sound smooth and careless. Some people are gold, and some are just dust that sticks to your shoes. Erica clapped from the doorway like she had just heard the funniest joke in the world. I didn't say a word, but something cold settled deep in my chest, like winter arriving all at once. Before that night, my life had been simple in the hardest way possible. I was 32, living in a small apartment in Phoenix with my husband Daniel and our newborn son. I worked remote accounting during the day and picked up weekend retail shifts whenever I could. Every dollar mattered. Every hour counted. My biggest dream wasn't fancy vacations or luxury cars. It was a front door that belonged to us. A small house. A yard where my son could take his first steps. Something stable. Something ours. I kept a little notebook in the kitchen drawer where I tracked every dollar we saved. Sometimes late at night, after feeding the baby, I would sit at the table counting numbers while the apartment stayed quiet. That notebook felt like proof that hard work could build something solid. Daniel always believed in family loyalty above everything else, especially when it came to Lorraine. He trusted her in ways that sometimes made me uncomfortable. Mom's handled money her whole life. He once told me casually, "She knows what she's doing." Lorraine had a way of speaking that made everything sound reasonable, calm, reassuring. But she had always favored Erica. That much was obvious from the beginning. Erica was Daniel's older sister, and in Lorraine's eyes, she could do no wrong, even when she failed, even when her plans collapsed. I remembered one Thanksgiving when Erica arrived wearing diamond earrings that sparkled under the kitchen lights. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had complained she couldn't afford groceries. Lorraine had hugged her proudly that day, telling everyone how hard Erica was trying to build her future. I had smiled politely from the corner of the kitchen, stirring gravy while nobody noticed how long my shifts had been that week. 2 months before that dinner, Lorraine had visited our apartment carrying a casserole dish and that same sweet voice she used whenever she wanted something. We sat at the tiny kitchen table while the baby slept in the next room. "I need a small favor," she had said gently. Her words were smooth. "Careful. It's just temporary paperwork for Erica's business. Your credit is excellent. Olivia. It'll help her get started." I hesitated back then. Something about the request made my stomach tighten. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's family," he said. "We help each other." Lorraine smiled warmly, nodding. "You're strong," she added. "You can handle responsibility." I wanted peace. I wanted acceptance. So I said yes. That memory came rushing back as I sat at Lorraine's dining table, staring at the paper now half hidden beneath her purse. When she turned to greet a guest near the door, I reached forward slowly and pulled the document toward me. My name was printed across the top. Below it, lines of financial language filled the page. Loan terms, amount fields, signature sections. My hands started to tremble before my mind fully understood why. Daniel noticed me reading and quickly reached for the paper. "That's nothing important," he said quietly. But he didn't meet my eyes. That was when the first crack formed inside my chest. Lorraine turned back toward me and smiled again, her expression smooth and unbothered. Outside, Erica laughed loudly, revving the engine of her new SUV like she wanted the whole neighborhood to hear. Inside, my heartbeat grew louder than anything else in the room. I stared down at the signature section near the bottom of the page. The name written there looked like mine. But something about it felt wrong. The curve of the letters, the pressure of the ink. Too careful, too practiced. A cold realization began to rise inside me. Slow and heavy, I wasn't just confused anymore. I was afraid. Dinner ended with laughter and conversation like nothing had changed. Plates clinked. Glasses tapped. Lorraine complimented Erica again and again while Daniel stayed quiet beside me. No one noticed how still I had become. When I finally stepped outside into the cool night air, I paused near the driveway. Erica's SUV gleamed under the streetlight, its polished surface reflecting my face back at me. Pale, uncertain, like someone who had just stepped into a story she didn't understand yet. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at that reflection, while the sound of laughter drifted out through the open door behind me. One thought repeated itself over and over in my mind. Did they just gamble my future without telling me? And for the first time since agreeing to that temporary favor, I knew exactly what I had to do next. In the morning, I would check my credit report. No matter what I found, I had a feeling my life would never look the same again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise with a tightness in my chest that refused to go away. Daniel had already left for work without saying goodbye, which wasn't like him. The apartment felt too quiet, like the air itself was waiting for something bad to happen. My son slept peacefully in his crib, soft breaths filling the silence while I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me. That same little savings notebook sat beside my coffee mug, but I didn't touch it. For the first time, those numbers didn't feel like progress. They felt meaningless. 3 unread emails blinked at the top of my screen, all from a sender I didn't recognize. Loan status notice. My fingers hovered over the trackpad longer than they should have. A strange chill crept down my arms as I clicked the first message open. Words filled the screen. Formal language. Payment warnings. Dates I didn't recognize. I swallowed hard and logged into my credit monitoring account. The loading circle spun slowly, each second stretching tighter around my nerves. When the page finally loaded, my breath caught in my throat. My credit score had dropped. Not by a little, by enough to make my stomach twist. Below it, several loan entries appeared, ones I had never seen before. Commercial business financing. The words looked cold and unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone else's life. One line stood out more than the rest. Payment past due. My hands began to tremble as I clicked into the detailed loan information. Numbers filled the screen, balances, dates, interest charges, but one detail made my heart slam against my ribs. The contact email listed on the account wasn't mine. It belonged to Lorraine. I blinked once, thinking I had misread it. But when I checked the phone number, it matched hers too. All the notifications, all the warnings, they had never come to me. They had gone straight to her. A slow realization spread through me like ice in my veins. This hadn't been an accident. It had been arranged. I scrolled further, finding months of missed alerts, payment reminders, overdue notices, legal warnings, all redirected to Lorraine's contact details. Each one felt like another crack forming beneath my feet. My chest tightened as I opened a new browser tab and searched Erica's business name. Erica Ross, Boutique Phoenix. The search results appeared instantly. But instead of polished photos and advertisements, I found broken links and angry customer posts. The business website no longer worked. Social media pages were abandoned, filled with complaints about delayed orders and missing refunds. One comment stopped me cold. This business shut down without warning. I stared at the screen, feeling the truth settle into place piece by piece. The loan hadn't been temporary. It had funded a failing business. And now that business was gone. But the debt was still here, under my name. That evening, when Daniel walked through the apartment door, I didn't greet him like I usually did. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, waiting. He froze when he saw the document spread out across the surface. "Did you know about this loan?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "I thought Mom handled the paperwork," he said. "I didn't think it was a big deal." My throat tightened. You didn't think signing my name to a business loan was a big deal." He rubbed his face, avoiding my eyes. "She wouldn't hurt us," he insisted. "She was just trying to help Erica. Just trying to help Erica." The same excuse Lorraine had used for years. As if helping Erica always mattered more than protecting me. My phone rang suddenly, cutting through the tension in the room. Lorraine's name flashed across the screen. I answered and placed the call on speaker. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. "You're overreacting," she said smoothly. "That loan is a family investment. Erica just needed support." "Support?" The word made my stomach twist. "You used my name," I said, "without telling me." Lorraine sighed like I was the one causing trouble. "You're strong, Olivia," she replied. "You can handle responsibility." Not once did she apologize. Not once did she admit she had crossed a line. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, I sat alone scrolling through my phone, trying to steady my thoughts. That was when a message notification popped up from an old friend. I opened it without thinking. A screenshot filled the screen. It was Erica's social media post. "Some people ruined my business by refusing to support family." My chest tightened as I read the comments below it. People expressing sympathy for her. Calling her brave. Calling her misunderstood. Not one person asking what really happened. Not one person defending me. Before I could fully process the humiliation creeping through my chest, the doorbell rang the next morning. A delivery envelope sat on the floor outside my apartment. White. Official. Heavy in my hands. I carried it inside and tore it open slowly, already knowing it wouldn't contain anything good. Inside was a printed notice. Urgent financial warning. Possible legal action if payment was not resolved. My breath caught in my throat as the words blurred together. This wasn't just debt anymore. This was legal danger. This was the kind of mistake that could follow me for years. Could destroy my credit. Could destroy my chance of ever owning a home. Could destroy everything I had been working toward. I sat at the kitchen table again, surrounded by papers, feeling the weight of every decision I had trusted them with. From the crib behind me, my son let out a soft cry. I turned and lifted him gently into my arms, holding him close while my mind raced. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for his future. That thought changed something inside me. I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts I hadn't touched in years. One name stopped my finger. Marcus Hale. A man I had once worked with in a small legal office long before motherhood and savings plans took over my life. My finger hovered over the call button. If this was fraud, then maybe I wasn't powerless. Before fear could stop me, I pressed call, knowing whatever happened next would decide whether I survived this or lost everything. Marcus answered on the fourth ring, his voice steady and familiar in a way that made my chest tighten with relief. "Olivia," he said, sounding surprised. "It's been a long time." I didn't waste time explaining pleasantries. My words came out tight and controlled as I told him everything: the loan, the signature, the contact information that didn't belong to me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus spoke slowly. "If what you're telling me is accurate, Olivia, this isn't just a misunderstanding. This could be fraud." The word landed heavier than anything else I had heard so far. Fraud. Not a family mistake. Not bad luck. A crime. That afternoon, I drove downtown to Marcus's office, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The tall glass building reflected the blazing Arizona sun, making it feel like I was walking into something bigger than myself. Inside his office, Marcus spread the documents across his desk with careful precision. He studied the signature first. Comparing it to one I wrote in front of him, he frowned. "This doesn't match," he said quietly. My stomach twisted. He placed the papers side by side, pointing to the curves of the letters. "See this," he continued. "Your natural stroke moves faster. This one looks practiced. Practiced. Like someone had studied my handwriting." A slow, sickening realization crept through me. Someone had taken the time to learn how to write my name. When I returned home later, I began searching through months of emails and text messages like my life depended on it, because now, it probably did. That was when I found it. An email from Lorraine, dated 2 months earlier. Subject line: just temporary paperwork. My throat tightened as I read it again. Her words sounded harmless, friendly, reassuring. But now they felt calculated. Then I found a text from Daniel sent that same week. Mom handled the forms already. Already. Without me present. Without me signing anything. That evening, Daniel walked through the apartment door and froze when he saw the stack of papers covering the kitchen table. I slid the signature comparison toward him without saying a word. He stared at it for a long time, long enough for silence to fill every corner of the room. Finally, his voice came out low. "This doesn't look like yours." It was the first time I saw doubt replace blind loyalty in his eyes. Relief flickered inside me, but it was followed quickly by bitterness. He should have seen this sooner. Later that night, Marcus called again. "Do not confront them yet," he warned. "Let them think you don't know. If they keep using your name, they'll make more mistakes." Silence became my weapon after that. Days passed quietly, but I watched everything. Checked emails, monitored notifications, waited. Then one afternoon, another alert appeared on my phone. A new loan activity update. My chest tightened as I opened the details. Another request. Still under my name. Still moving forward without my permission. They hadn't stopped. They hadn't even hesitated. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. No longer tracking savings, but documenting evidence. Dates. Amounts. Times. Every detail recorded with careful precision. Late that night, while my son slept and the apartment remained silent, my phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus. "This is enough to move forward." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink into my chest. For the first time since discovering the truth, I didn't feel afraid. I felt steady, in control, like the ground beneath my feet had finally stopped shifting. Just as I leaned back in my chair, my phone lit up again. Lorraine. Her name flashed across the screen. Bright and persistent. I didn't answer. I watched it ring until it stopped. Seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. Her voice sounded sweet. Too sweet. "Olivia." "Sweetheart." "Call me back. We need to talk." Sweetness hiding something darker beneath it. She still thought she was in control. Still believed I didn't know the truth. For the first time since this nightmare began, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself to smile. Because now, I finally knew exactly how this story was going to end. 3 days later, an email arrived that made everything inside me go still. Subject line: Grand reopening, Ross Boutique, Phoenix. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. My finger frozen above the trackpad. Erica was opening another boutique. Another business. Like nothing had happened. Like the first one hadn't collapsed under debt that was still chained to my name. Attached to the invitation was a polished flyer. Erica smiling confidently. Lorraine listed beneath her name as financial sponsor. They weren't stopping. They weren't even afraid. I forwarded the email to Marcus without typing a single word. His response came less than 5 minutes later. "We're ready." That evening, Daniel and I sat across from Marcus in his office while he arranged documents into neat stacks. Every page told part of the same story: emails, altered contact records, forged signatures, redirected notices. "They'll be there," Marcus said calmly. "Authorities will attend the event. Publicly." Publicly. The word sent a ripple of nerves through my chest. But beneath the fear was something stronger. Certainty. For the first time, Daniel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm staying with you," he said quietly. "Not with them. With me." The night of the reopening arrived warm and bright. The Arizona air heavy with anticipation. The boutique was glowing with string lights, champagne glasses clinking, guests chatting as if this was just another celebration. Erica stood near the entrance, smiling wide, dressed like success itself. Lorraine moved through the crowd like a proud queen, greeting guests and laughing loudly. When Lorraine noticed me entering, her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. "So glad you came," she said, her voice sweet and artificial. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Moments later, Erica stepped forward to make her speech, thanking Lorraine for believing in her when others didn't. Applause filled the room. Then the doors opened. 2 uniformed officials walked inside. The room fell silent. You could hear glasses being set down, whispers spreading across the crowd like wildfire. Lorraine's face tightened as the officials approached her directly, holding printed documents in their hands. "Lorraine Ross," one of them said clearly, "we need to speak with you regarding financial fraud and identity misuse." Erica's smile vanished instantly. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Documents were placed in Lorraine's hands, signature comparisons, transaction records, evidence she couldn't explain away with charm or laughter. Guests stared openly now, watching everything unfold. For the first time since I met her, Lorraine looked small, not powerful, not untouchable, just exposed. Daniel stayed beside me, his hand still wrapped around mine as Lorraine's voice grew louder. Desperate. Defensive. But there was nowhere left for her to hide. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds as my phone buzzed nonstop on the kitchen counter. I picked it up slowly. 53 missed calls from Lorraine. 49 from Erica. Voicemails stacked one after another. My chest felt strangely calm as I pressed play on the first one. "We were wrong," Lorraine's voice pleaded. "Please come back. We need to fix this." Another message followed. "Don't do this," Erica said, her voice trembling. "We can figure it out." Figure it out. Now they wanted help. Now they wanted mercy. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing my reply. "Why are you begging someone you once called worthless?" I pressed send. Then I set the phone down and walked into the living room, where a small envelope waited on the table. Inside was an approval notice confirming my liability had been removed after the investigation. My credit was restored. My future was mine again. Later that week, Daniel and I stood outside a modest starter home under construction. Nothing fancy. No luxury. Just a small frame of wood rising against the desert sky. But it was honest. It was ours. I held the temporary keys in my palm, remembering Lorraine's words from that night at the dinner table. Some people are gold, and some are dust. I looked down at the dusty ground beneath my shoes and smiled softly to myself. Dust doesn't disappear. Dust settles. Dust builds. Dust becomes the foundation for something stronger than anyone expected. Standing there in the quiet afternoon light, I realized something that took me years to understand. Family isn't the people who demand your sacrifice. Family is the people who respect your boundaries. And sometimes, the moment you stop begging for acceptance is the moment your life finally begins. If you've ever been made to feel small, or treated like you didn't matter, remember this: your silence can be strength, and your patience can be power. And if this story reminded you of your own battles, or gave you the courage to stand your ground, stay with us. Share your story in the comments. And subscribe, because sometimes the stories we tell together help someone else find the strength to protect their future.